Greetings sailors and welcome to my first look at the Prinz Eugen, the upcoming Tier 8 premium German cruiser. Now, being a Tier 8 premium cruiser thus far has meant that you get something special. The Atago has got its cruiser heel, which you don't normally get on cruisers until I think Tier 9 and 10, or is it even just Tier 10? I can't remember. And of course the Kutuzov has the smoke alongside its very long range guns. What does the Prinz Eugen have? Well, on the face of it, nothing. There is nothing special about this ship. There is no gimmick. And at least there isn't in the state it was given to us to test. Now, this video is coming out a day or two after everybody else's, and that means I can actually include this information without having to do on-screen annotations or anything. That it is, in fact, going to be... And to bring in some World of Tanks analogies here, it's going to be a cross between the old school Jagdtiger 8.8 and the Churchill Mark III. Now, what's special about those in World of Tanks? Well, the Jagdtiger 8.8 in particular, back in the day, was known as being one of the best credit-making credit-making tanks in the game. It had a cheap ammo cost, it made a lot of credits for not doing a lot of damage, but over time, the other Tier 8 premiums were basically buffed to the Jagdtiger 8.8's level, so it's not special in that regard anymore, but once upon a time it was. The Churchill 3 gets a crew multiplier for any experience gained in that tank, and that makes it very useful as a crew trainer. Now, what they're going to do with the Prinz Eugen as its gimmick, it's not going to get any special consumables, it's just Hydro Defensive AA as the regular Admiral Hipper ships do. The gimmick will be that the ship will get plus 50% to the Commander XP, and there will be a second camo pattern available with plus 10% credit modifier. So this is why it's going to be somewhere in between those two World of Tanks premiums. Now, that second camo, it sounds very like it's going to have to be one that you buy separately. And the quoted figure has been 2,000 doubloons. Now, the wording was such that I don't know if this is definitely confirmed or not. And this is all very late information as regards to the actual embargo. The embargo is the 1st of September. We actually got this information on the 1st of September. And I was playing through this thinking, what's the point? Because my personal feeling is that this is quite a mediocre ship. I wouldn't say it's a bad ship, but it's something like the Pensacola or maybe the Indianapolis would be a fairer example, where it's possible to do okay in it, but you're not going to really say it's amazing. It could be maybe described as mediocre at best. And I had to work very hard to get even halfway damage, decent damage games in this. So before I knew that it was going to get this plus 50% Commander XP and the second skin, and I'm not so hot on the idea of that second skin that you have to pay out extra money for. I mean, 2k doubloons is what? That's approaching 10 euros? Or is it about 10 euros? I'm not sure exactly. I'd have to look that up, but it's around that kind of level. So if you want that extra, credit-making ability, that unique extra credit-making ability, you've got to shell out extra. I don't know. I'm not sure how I feel about that. I don't know that I entirely approve, but I mean, they're undoubtedly going to do like packages where the second camo comes in with it, but anyway. But my point is that it changes my point of view of this ship a bit. The ship itself, it's still not fun, especially when it stands next to the Atago and the Kutuzov, both of which are, as ships, better ships to play, more fun to play, and I think easier to get a handle on as well. They're more forgiving in their own ways. The Atago has that heel, which is absolutely, in a cruiser, having the ability to get some health back is absolutely wonderful. And of course the Kutuzov can just create its own cover and sit in its own smoke and pelt away. Although that does have certain limitations, because you really have to basically come to a dead halt before you can use the smoke in the Kutuzov, and that's pretty risky a lot of the time. But as with the old school Jagdtiger 8.8 in World of Tanks, well, that was the same kind of machine. It was not particularly fun to play. And I think a lot of people, well, for me anyway, a lot of people also shared that point of view. And it was one of my first Tier 8 premium tanks in World of Tanks. But I didn't play it to have fun. I played it to make credits, and it was exceptionally good at that. You could have a really terrible damage game and still walk away with, you know, several tens of thousands of credits profit from not a lot of damage. So the fact that this is going to be the gimmick of the Prince Eugen, I still don't think it's a fantastic ship. And I know the same is probably true for the Hipper as well, which I should say I've never actually played since I was doing the German cruiser preview, so it's been a long time since I had any kind of contact with the Hipper. I'm only up to the Nürburg on the German cruiser line, but as it is basically a premium Hipper, slightly worse than a premium Hipper actually in a lot of ways, or well, slightly worse than just the Hipper. It's hard work. It's not an easy ship to play, especially. And you can have decent games in it, but you can also get punished very hard very quickly. There were numerous games where I'd be sailing along full health and then a battleship that I didn't know was aiming at me hurts me for the first time and I'm down to like 1,000 hit points in one go. It's a very squashy ship, and I obviously, you know, feel like the Hipper must be the same. So I'll run down the stats. I mean, I normally just launch straight into the stats, but I wanted to try and explain where I was coming at the Hipper from. And if I recorded this video even yesterday, I'd have just been sat here saying, I can't see the point of this ship. Why would you buy this ship when you could buy an Atago or a Kutuzov or hell, even a Tirpitz? But if you want something that's a crew trainer that gives you, I mean, 50% bonus commander XP, that's pretty hefty. And if they do this thing where you buy the camo and you get that extra 10% credits, you know, if it's a ship that you at least can like get along with the playstyle of, that might be a worthwhile investment, because over the lifetime of, you know, hundreds of battles, an extra 10% could be a fairly substantial amount of credits. So, like I was saying, that's the gimmick. That's going to be the point of this ship. It doesn't have any other special abilities otherwise. So there's nothing that helps you in battle, but the stuff that helps you in port, if you see what I mean. And in that regard, I think this is actually unique for a premium. I don't think they've done this with a premium ship before. Now, we've had event camos previously that give you, like, bonus XP and bonus credits and whatever. But this is the first time that there will be a ship where there's a permanent bonus for Commander XP and a permanent camo, a permanent paint scheme for credits, for bonus credits. So I get the feeling this is something of a test balloon for Wargaming, and I get the feeling that maybe just how late this information got to us, maybe it was the fact that they couldn't quite decide what the special thing of the Prince Eugen was going to be. And it appears this is it. Now, having said there's going to be a second camo, the camo that you see here, the camo, the paint scheme that you saw in the little intro beauty shots, that is not going to be the final thing. They're actually going to give it camo that it had, or a paint scheme that it had during Operation, oh god, what's it called? Operation Rhine something. Operation Rheinübung, there we go. I actually got it open in Wikipedia on a page in my browser. So this was the sortie of the Prince Eugen and the Bismarck out into the Atlantic, and this, of course, was the final sortie of the Bismarck. This was when the Bismarck had its last voyage and it was hunted down by the Royal Navy. Now, the camo scheme for that is quite distinctive, and this was going to be another of my complaints with the Prince Eugen, that there were not just that camo scheme, but one or two, or at least one other. And, you know, if this grey that we see here is actually a historical camo scheme as well, then okay, that would make 3 in total. But there were multiple options, and instead they went with this really boring plain grey, which when I first saw it was like, wait, is that the premium camo? And I actually took it off, and the main difference between this camo and the uncamoed ship is you can see rust. on the other ship, and it's a slightly different colour of grey. So that was going to be one of my complaints, that the permanent camo was incredibly boring. It was literally the most dull thing they could have chosen. But fortunately, they are going to change that. So, having said all that, let's actually get to some stats. Now, in terms of having said it is worse than the Hipper, there is one thing in which it has better, and that is hit points. It's got 45,000, and that actually makes it, in terms of hit points, the top of the Tier 8 cruisers. The Hipper's got 43,800, and the rest are all below that. There was actually a comment under my last video that I'm maybe throwing out too many numbers here, so I'll try and just go with the pertinent ones. Also, I should, that cursor coming up on the screen is actually just reminding me, I should maybe say these are all battles I recorded as I was playing rather than battles recorded from the replay, so you might notice things are a little bit different, like you can see when I'm control selecting things. So anyway, on with the stats. In terms of the gun stats, it's basically the same as the Hipper. The only thing that is worse is it has 200 meters less range, but 17.5 kilometers is still pretty good. That still puts it a little bit ahead of the Chapayev, and obviously the Kutuzov is, you know, the massive outright winner at Tier 8, but of the other premiums, or just the other cruisers, I mean 17.5 is towards the top end. Everything else in terms of the rate of fire, the shell damage, they're all basically the same as the Hipper. So it's reasonably accurate. It's a German cruiser. You're going to be relying on your AP shells a lot more than your HE. And this is one of the reasons why I found it a bit problematic, is because there are a lot of battleships around at the moment. Because you don't have the HE as a fallback, so much as you do on the other cruisers, it makes it a little bit more difficult when you're relying so much on your AP shells, because the AP isn't necessarily going to be that effective against a lot of targets. Now, you can always try and fire it into superstructures, but sometimes that's easier said than done, and sometimes setting fires would be so much more preferable, but the same number of shots that you can get in from this that you would with, say, an Atago, the Atago is going to be doing more damage, and it's going to be setting more fires, and ultimately, overall, the ability to do fire damage is, for some cruisers, that's an important component of their damage dealing capability overall. So the fact that it's German, you know, it's not unique in that it has that poor HE, it's just characteristics of the Germans overall. But I found that to be one of the less pleasant aspects, because, you know, when all's said and done, in a premium cruiser, it's that ability to deal damage that really does rake in the credits. Your secondaries, again, basically the same, in fact, I think identical to the Admiral Hipper. So you've got 6 double 105mm mounts that fire HE out to a distance of 4.5 kilometers, which is fairly standard at Tier 8. The Atago has a bit better than that, and I think the Megami has a bit better than that as well, but the rest are all 4.5 or 4 kilometers. The AA is very slightly worse than the Hipper, and that still makes it pretty good for its tier. The New Orleans is possibly the best of the regular cruisers. I think the Hipper's not far behind there. In fact, you might argue the Hipper's the best, because it's got its second best amount of DPS at its outer envelope, the 4.5 kilometer of the dual purpose guns. And this is basically the same. It's got very slightly less DPS overall, and in fact the Eugen has an AA rating of 57, whereas the Hipper has 58. But it's like literally 10 less DPS. The actual secondaries and the AA gun arrangement is pretty identical, so it's just a little bit less DPS. So it's still pretty strong. And you'll notice both these games I was running Hydro rather than defensive AA. I actually wasn't running into carriers that often, and just with the amount of destroyers that were also around, I decided that I was going to run around with hydroacoustic search instead, and largely that worked, but occasionally the defensive AA would have been more useful. That one is just down to personal choice, I think. The last game, by the way, the first game was a top tier game. That was the highest damage game I managed. Otherwise, I was having games between 60k and 70k reasonably regularly, but I had to work for it. This is going to be one of the lower damage games, but it's also a tier 10 game, so I thought it might be interesting to see how it fares when bottom tier. So, where were we? AA. So yeah, basically the same as a Hipper, which is pretty good for tier 8. Torpedoes, again, identical, completely identical to the Hipper, the usual 6 kilometer German torpedoes. If you can get close enough, they are useful, but sometimes getting close enough is a bit tricky, and because it's a German cruiser, everybody knows you've got them. One of the things I was going to say originally was, wouldn't it be nice if the gimmick of this was that compared to the other German cruisers, it gets longer range torpedoes. You know, that could have worked if it had 8 or 10 kilometer torpedoes to work with instead of the usual 6 kilometer ones. That would have been a perfectly acceptable gimmick, but no, they've gone a completely different direction instead. Speed, 32 knots, identical to the Hipper, which is actually towards the bottom. In fact, it is the bottom of tier 8. Most of the tier 8 cruisers are fairly fast. Let's see, you've got the Atago topping out at 35.5 knots at the top end. The next slowest, or compared to the Hipper and the Eugen, is 32.5 knots on the New Orleans. So it's not the fastest ship. This was one of the other reasons why I didn't like this very much, and probably wouldn't enjoy the Hipper very much either, is it feels very stiff in the water. It's not a particularly fast ship. And the next stat definitely tells me why it feels stiff in the water. It's got a 770 meter turn radius, and that's 30 meters worse than the Hipper. And that's also not great for this tier. It's towards, it's over the average, but it's not like it's, at the top end. You've got, like, the Megami's got 750, which is, a bit better, but then you've got, like, the Chapayev with 890, and that's a complete outlier, of course. All the Soviet cruisers have wide turn circles, but I think the Chapayev is one of the worst. The Atago has 790, so it's not like that's, doesn't turn in the water as well, but it's faster, so it sort of makes sense. And the Kutuzov is 760. So, like I said, this 770 is not awful, but it would be nice if it was just a little bit better. However, it possibly is to do with the fact that this has the so-called Atlantic bow. And I don't have the Hipper, so I can't flash on the screen to directly compare the shape of the bow. But I noticed this with, for instance, the Gneisenau and the Scharnhorst as well. They had a different looking bow. So it might be that this is slightly longer than the regular Hipper and therefore has a slightly worse turn radius. There might be that kind of a logic. The rudder shift, also slightly worse, 10.9 versus 10.7, so it's only a small difference. That, however, does make it, at 10.9, the worst rudder shift at tier 8. Everybody else is below below 10 seconds. And, I mean, the next worst is the Chapayev at 9.7. So that's over a second better. So that also contributed greatly to that feeling of stiffness. It does not handle in a particularly nimble manner, and that makes dodging incoming fire at times quite problematic. There were occasions when, even when I could see someone turning their guns, or I was aware that somebody might start shooting at me, and I was trying to, maneuver and dodge out the way, and I just couldn't do it because it isn't nimble enough. So I would absolutely recommend getting the rudder shift equipment on this, because you will need it. Lastly, the detection stats, and again it is dead last for its tier. Now, up until this point, the Kutuzov has had the worst base detection at 14.5, although of course it being premium, it effectively has 14.1. Now, the base detection range of the Hipper is 14.2. The base detection of the Eugen is 14.9, and even with the camo it's 14.5. 14.5 is worse with camo than everything else without camo. Well, actually, having said that, no. No, yes it is. Yes, that's right. I'm just looking across at my numbers. Yes. No. So even with the permanent camo, it's still the least stealthy of the tier 8 cruisers. And you combine that with the fact that it's not that maneuverable, and you start to get some of that feeling of the Pensacola. Now, it's not nearly as bad as the Pensacola in a lot of ways, but I think you kind of have to treat it in the same way as a squashy ship where you have to be incredibly wary of getting shot at by anybody because you could lose a lot of your health very quickly. And because it has the worst detection, it will get spotted first. However, of course, it's a Tier 8 cruiser, so you've got not only camo, you can not only put on the captain skill, but you can get the concealment system, which also knocks off 10%, and I highly recommend it. So with the camo alone, you get 14.5 kilometers, which, as I've said, makes it worse than all of the other uncamouflaged Tier 8 cruisers. With the concealment system, you can get it down to 13.4. Concealment system and camo gets you down to 13, and I know that because I haven't actually put the numbers in the spreadsheet, but that's the configuration I was using. 13's better, but it's still worse than all of the other ships in the same situation. And with the captain skill on top of that, at 12%, or the captain skill alone would take you down to 13.1. With everything together, you can get 11.2 kilometers. So it is worth having your skilled captains in this. If you've got a captain with a concealment system, not concealment system, the concealment expertise, that is worthwhile. Except that kind of negates the point of having it to train up new captains. So you probably won't have the benefit of that, maybe. But even with just camo and the concealment system, 13 is alright. 13 is workable. If you're just using the camo alone, 14.5, no. So that's like a 2 million credits investment you need right there. But I think most people would recommend you to get the concealment system on your Tier 8 cruisers regardless. Now, of course, all the other ships can have exactly the same setup, and I mean, like the Hipper, I already said what the gap is between the base ranges. The Hipper can get to 10.7, so the Hipper can still have a ½ kilometer better concealment with, everything. And all the other ships, barring the Kutuzov, all the other ships can get to under 10 kilometers detection. So, 11.2 for your best possible scenario sounds alright, but then you look at the Megami can get to 9.1, the Atago can get to 8.9 for crying out loud. That's one of the things Atago is known for, that it is one of the stealthier cruisers. The Kutuzov, the Kutuzov's still not super good, 10.9, but that's still 300 meters better than the Eugen gets. So I'm not quite sure how having the Atlantic bow would make it way more visible, like 700 meters more visible than the Hipper. I can understand it being more stiff in the water, but having it be that much more visible doesn't particularly make sense to me. So overall, as a cruiser, if you want a premium cruiser that's fun to play, comparing it directly to the Atago and the Kutuzov, get one of those. The Atago especially, it's not necessarily a newbie friendly ship, but once it starts to gel, it can kick ass. I actually I wasn't sure if I was just playing badly or whatever, because I was having games where I was just getting nuked for all my health, or I was barely doing any damage, or whatever. So I just jumped into an Atago game. I actually searched for my replays and saw that it was my 7th Atago game since July. It's not like I play this ship all the time. The one premium I have played a lot of at Tier 8 is the Tirpitz. The Atago is not my go-to ship. I jumped in, it was a loss, 100k plus damage, I think just over 100k, and that was with me screwing up quite seriously at points. I probably could have done more, but there were times when I just gave away way too much health, and it was really only the fact that I had the heal that kept me in the game. But that is one of the things that makes the Atago so good, is it gets that heal. This doesn't have a heal. It's far harder work to get a really appreciable amount of damage. Mostly you're having to rely on that German AP, and if there are a lot of battleships around, that makes life difficult. Even with broadsides, even with the fact that it does have decent accuracy. I don't think I actually mentioned the dispersion values at all, but I mean, it's German. The dispersion values are fairly decent. It's one of the more accurate cruisers at Tier 8. But even with that, it just makes life a bit difficult, and the HE is just so thoroughly lackluster that there are times when you're going to need to resort to the HE when you don't really have a lot of choice, and it feels like in a different cruiser you could do so much more. But that's also true of the regular Hipper as well. So it's not like that's a unique criticism of this ship. However, having said all that, 50% Captain XP bonus, I mean, that's pretty damn hefty. And there's almost certainly going to be another German line in the future. So if you're a particular fan of the German ships, or you're considering getting into the German ships, maybe that makes it worth it. Just don't expect to be able to roll around and do the kind of things that you can do in an Atago or even a Kutuzov, because it can't do those things at all. This is a much more fragile ship in a lot of ways, and it's not like it's hard to kill either an Atago or a Kutuzov, but it just felt like the combination of stats, the fact that this gets seen before anybody else, the fact that it doesn't maneuver that well in the water, and the fact that it feels like it takes citadel damage really easily. And it'll be nice come the next patch when we get the armor viewer and I can actually get concrete, information on the citadels from the client itself. I haven't gotten the client for the test server for the next patch. I haven't bothered this time round, but I've seen other people's videos and it looks like some really good stuff. And I can't wait till World of Tanks eventually catches up and has that in as well. But having said that, the next patch for World of Tanks is looking pretty good as well. But it just felt like the amount of damage I was taking, yeah. I mean, it does have the least belt armor by a bit of a margin for the tier 8 cruisers. Well, the Hipper does, and obviously this is basically a Hipper. It's like 80 mil, so it's kind of fragile. And for a lot of people, that's going to make it difficult to play. But if you are already proficient in the German cruisers, you will know what to do in this thing. But if you aren't proficient in the German cruisers, if you haven't played up that line before, then this might be a bit awkward to get used to. And it might take you a little while to adjust to. And it's not the only premium in the game like that. There are others, such as the Atlanta, for instance, that is a bit different and a bit difficult. And, well, highly map dependent, probably more so than most other ships. But this is, I'd say, more team dependent than map dependent, and also sometimes you just have to rely on luck and hope that you don't get spanked too badly, because manoeuvring out of the way of incoming shells is just less of an option than in some of the other ships. So that was a tier 10 game, much less damage, but I felt like I was able to do something. I didn't get unduly focused too much, although there was a Chapayev and a North Carolina, something like that, that seemed to want to focus me above everything else, even when they were closer targets, even when I wasn't some kind of incredibly low health attractive target myself. I think they just saw the new ship and had to fire at it. And sometimes that's an issue when you're testing these new ships. I didn't find it too much with the Eugen though, but it was just a little bit noticeable in that game where that quite possibly was the reason. So it was an okay match otherwise though, and I felt like I did help out a bit, and it was one of the better matches in terms of XP, although not the best. Credits wise, it wasn't that good, and that's because I wasn't able to do that much damage, but this is without the benefit of trying out that new 10% skin, because they have given it us to test if we have the test server downloaded, but I don't, and I already had everything recorded and everything edited into place, so I wasn't going to go and then spend another couple of days on the test server with the Eugen and see if the camo really makes that big of a difference. But over the course of time, it will. 10% is 10%. It's just, I'm still not convinced that 2,000 gold is not maybe asking just a tiny wee bit too much. So there we go, the Prinz Eugen. Overall, as an actual ship to play, maybe not that fun. My reaction to the ship itself is still mostly, well, I can just sum it up with meh. A resounding, profound meh. But with the extra gimmick that it has, it might well be worth your while if you have a particular interest in the German ships. Obviously, if you don't, getting that 50% commander bonus is completely useless to you if you've only got, say, Japanese and American ships, in which case that's going to limit its appeal. But still, it's interesting, and it'll be interesting to see if we get similar ships for other nations in the future that also have that kind of a bonus. Because in World of Tanks terms, it's literally just the Churchill 3 after all these years that gets that crew XP bonus. There is no other tank like that. And that might well end up being the same for warships as well. We shall see. So hopefully you found this first look useful, and if you have, you can leave any comments below. You can hit the like button, you can sub if you haven't already, and as always, stay tuned for more.